Letter number 1, regarding the attempt. Dated 10/34/49, 222W. What could I say in my defense? I was there, at the waterfall, with a net gun. One doesn't carry a net gun if one isn't fishing, and you don't need it if you're only scooping up small takes of flinties or schoolfish. It was, after all, equipped with my largest net, one large enough to ensnare a man. Officer Crombie remained civil enough after she had caught me. I clearly wasn't a poor fisher person turned pumper. I wore the smock and wide breeches of the landed. Therefore I must have money, connections, possibly friends in the commission. Circumspection was required. And there was much to work out. I was clearly of the surface city. Had I been sent by the enemy from one of their floating cities, they would have spotted me crossing the cracked expanse of the dry flat. My bearing did not suggest the mindset of an anarchist or some rogue male. But my story was thin. A lone fisherman, nostalgic for the sport, sneaking up to the face of the waterfall to dip his net in and see what he might catch. No, they didn't like that story much at all. Up there on the bridge, they questioned me for hours. I gave away nothing. I was almost bored, cool to their threats and cajoling. I don't know how I had the strength. The trick was that I believed it. I was just there to catch fish, and with a net, no less, not a harp gun at all. The pleasures of fishing were one of the many things that went when they forbid us all from the sea. Surely they could understand that some of the landed might retain that old impulse, some wisp of a soul. Still they thought of more questions. How had I even arrived at the face of the waterfall? But I wouldn't answer, even when they flipped me upside down and held my face underneath the violent downpour of the waterfall itself. The rush filling my mouth and nostrils, the feeling of my lungs straining to keep from being filled with water as well. The force of it left bruises around both my eyes. I couldn't tell them that I'd come through the pumping rooms. Who knows what punishment they'd devise for those poor souls, barred from their ancestral seaside villages and dinghies, to come and toil in the center of the city, cranking the great wheels and pulleys that diverted the flow of the waterfall into the pipes and aqueducts that kept the city alive. Hundreds of them kept silent in their rows as I walked through the great darkened halls where they toiled, pumpers. Even my friends among the landed hardly dared speak of them if they knew of their existence at all. They did, it must be said, look miserable in their work. A few glanced up as I passed. I was a curiosity in the pumping room. The dim light caught on their stained hands, on the rivulets' carved and hollowed faces. They knew I wasn't supposed to be there, but they would never tell the officers. I thought of the Owens. They had 4 children, none of whom knew where their parents had been disappeared to, made to slave away the rest of their days. It was heartbreaking to imagine them before the surfacers sundered them from the sea, on some soft shore, proudly hauling in a day's catch, and then dressing that family fillet with bread burrs and magogo fruit. Their children laughing along the water's edge as they ate their fill on the beach that was their home. If the pumpers could keep their silence, then so could I. No, there was nothing they could do to make me talk. It would not have mattered if I did. There was only one thing they could do with me, in any case. A tide can turn in a day. I had begun the morning simply, without a thought for the future. I'd given up the idea of making plans many years back, and liked to follow the days as they wound themselves down. These illicit fishing trips had become my favorite way to pass the time. It's true that I took the largest net that my net gun could fire, suspicious in retrospect, but I never had any expectations about a day's haul. In fact, I hardly thought about the fish at all. There at the face of the waterfall, its deafening roar filling my mind, washing out all thoughts. It was peaceful, the great column of water leading up into the sky, like a pillar holding up the firmament, an axis mundi. Far above me, I could just see its point of origin in the gray eternal cloud, fixed above the city, changing but never moving, and pouring forth the deluge that sustains the city. the mist collected in droplets on my eyelashes, rendering the world into a distended blur. A cloud that never moves, water which never ceases to pour forth, and a hole beneath it, carved by the countless eons, disappearing into a bottomless pit down into the center of the world. The events of a single life, whatever they might have been, vanish into insignificance in the face of such a phenomenon. The beauty and violence of the eternal cloud and its waterfall work one over completely. It is true that I had been lately choosing platforms that were higher up the central scaffold, closer to the top. They felt more precarious, the metal joints creaking in the wind, generated by the rush of the waterfall, but I liked the thrill. And of course, I knew the highest level was reserved for our cherished leader, the High Commissioner himself. It was common knowledge that he appeared with his council and officers on the topmost platform. Each morning he surveyed the city and all that was in his command. No one in the winding streets and slanted homesteads below paid him much mind. He was nothing more than a speck in the sky from the point of view of the common city dweller. I have nothing against him or his project. I want that stated plainly, on the record. Unless you count the disturbance of fanciful hopes in a singular, privileged life as an affront, I can't say that I should have blame to hang around his neck. The small rebellions of the heart against the life that one is granted are hardly political matters. I had not timed my visit, and I certainly was surprised when he emerged on the platform. I had become entranced at a drama that had been playing out in the moments before. It was my first time so near the top, and I could just make out the words of the officers and guards arrayed above me. I cocked my ear because they were having a row. One was just a boy, with badly cropped hair, in a guard's uniform. Though the sight of his long-range harp gun, he had spotted somebody out on the dry flat. It was foolish to approach the city in that way. The dry flat made a better defense than any wall or moat ever would have. In every direction from the towering city ringing the waterfall was miles of cracked, dry earth, barren of life, not a weed, not an insect, not even a shadow. So, if someone was foolish enough to cross it, the guards on the scaffold easily spotted them. The arguing was about what to do with the person they had spotted. Another guard, who couldn't have been much older, kept shouting, "Nicknist, shoot him! He's a floater!" The boy with cropped hair kept shouting back, "Shut up!" But he kept his sight trained on the figure I couldn't see, shrouded in those great roving dust clouds on the dry flat. Behind them, an officer stepped onto the platform, a solid, imposing figure. This was my first sight of Crombie. In a gruff voice, she demanded to know what was happening. The older boy pointed to the figure on the flat. "Shoot him," Crombie commanded. Nickness turned and began to object. "I don't see why." But he dropped his thought when he saw who was standing with her. The High Commissioner himself. With that look of judgment that never seemed to leave his sullen face. Nicknist's eyes went wide. He squared his shoulders, pulling himself into the shape of a man, and with a crisp, "Yes, ma'am, Officer Crombie," spun back around to line up his shot. What happened next seemed predetermined, a sequence of events I had no control of, but merely observed. I didn't know if I was mirroring Nicknist or trying to prevent his shot, but I also lifted my net gun to my own shoulder and aimed it at our cherished leader. A net that size has force behind it. I knew it would dislodge the great man from the platform. When I cocked the trigger back to fire, Officer Crombie heard it. I pulled the trigger, and my netball whizzed toward the High Commissioner. With a sickening quickness, Crombie pushed the older guard off the platform just as my net sprang open. Her geometry was exact. The trajectory was perfect. My net ensnared him just as he began to fall, and he tumbled headfirst into the waterfall with a scream that was swallowed as quickly as it began. Crombie pulled our cherished leader onto his knees and then down from the platform. In the same moment, it seemed my own platform was flooded with uniforms. Though I offered no resistance, the guards made a great fuss of tackling me to the ground, wrenching the net gun from me, and twisting my arms behind my back. They wanted to show off. In half a moment, Crombie was there, fury splashed across her cheeks. Nicknist, the boy, cowering just behind. I have already mentioned their questions and the accompanying torture. It was, of course, a physical ordeal to be endured. What my soul had endured, how it had been made to bow before circumstances so crushing that no physical act could ever compare, was enough to detach it from however it had been fixed to the inside of me. Ironically, my gaunt spirit was the cause of my body's strength. I could endure anything, is what I'm telling you, because I already had. Also, what did I have to admit to? I had no orders, no co-conspirators, no employer or motive. There was nothing I could say to save myself in any case. Anyhow, they were already convinced they knew what I was. The only real debate was what to do about it. "We can't have a martyr," Crombie declared. "It has to be an accident." They took me up to the topmost platform, where only moments ago our cherished leader had stood, he who had just eluded my net. They untied my hands for plausible deniability. They walked me out onto a plank, the edge of the inward platform, to face the roar of the water, as I had stood so many times in silent contemplation. Crombie pointed at my back and said to Nick Nist, "You do it." He closed his eyes and shook his head, suddenly very much a boy again, terrified. "Fine," she said, and gave me a hard shove. And in I went, to descend with the eternal waterfall into a hole that had no bottom. Letter number 2, regarding the Crake, dated 10/34/50/638K. As it turned out, she pushed too hard. Lying there in the dark, the fall returned in flashes. Pedaling my legs through the spraying mists of the waterfall, spotting the pool below, I desperately looked for a safe landing, even though it was impossible. The fish, with the hook in its mouth, swims all the more furiously. I pushed the fall out of my mind. The horror was still fresh. Thinking of it made me feel like I was surely already dead. I was surrounded by darkness. Perhaps I had crossed over into whatever realm awaits on the other side of consciousness, if any awaits at all. My attempt to move dispelled me of the notion that I was divorced from the corporeal realm. The spasms of pain brought focus. I had survived. But I was badly injured. More terrible than the pain was the absence of feeling in my extremities. I tried to move my feet, my legs, and I could feel nothing where they should be. Only vague echoes of pain returned up my spinal column from a void below me. I closed my eyes. Perhaps I would die now, I thought, just a bit more slowly. The idea of being crippled or so badly disfigured that the rest of my life would be an excruciating ordeal gave the thought of death more appeal. I won't say I was trying to die, but neither was I trying to do anything else. I decided that the last image that I wanted to see was the seaside cave. How did I ever endure such beautiful and perfect days? Consciousness ebbed and flowed. I had time then, though I did not know it. My dreams drifted in and out of the sea, the darkness of my predicament interrupted by visions of clear water running over her feet as they sank in soft sand. Her voice. Finally, my eyes were forced wide by a series of painful spasms, which left no doubt about the state of my body. My eyes were, by then, adjusted to the dark, and I could make out the rough shape of the underground cavern I was in. Large swaths of fish netting were snagged on the rocks above me, and swayed with the pulse of the eternal waterfall, pouring through the center of the cave. It frothed and splashed where it passed through a large grate in the center, the size of a room. I had always thought its long fall was unimpeded. Near the edge of the waterfall, crumpled on the grate, was a dark and disturbing shape. I realized after a beat. The guard. The one Crombie had pushed into the trajectory of my net snare. The one who had become entangled and fell before I did. I thought for a moment he was alive because I saw his feet moving. When they did not stop, I realized that I was seeing the waterfall jostling them continuously, animating them as though he were still running from his fate. It felt morbid to continue watching. The rest of his shape was motionless. Instead, I allowed my eye to follow the grate. Where it ended, there was a still pool of water, collected runoff from the waterfall. The memory returned of plunging into water, holding my breath, surfacing, crawling. My life had been saved because I was lucky enough to land in that pool. I must have crawled out and pulled myself to this spot. I attempted again to move my feet. It was a very bad idea. So instead I kept still. I had no thought for what to do next. Suddenly, the silent surface of the pool was broken. A green gelatinous bubble surfaced, glowing from the inside. It slid toward the edge and emerged onto 8 spiked crab legs, clicking on the cavern floor. They transported the green bubble they were attached to like a jelly cake, wriggling along on scissor legs. It was a crake. 1 or 2 had ended up in my fishing nets in the past, but always dead, with the jelly sack like a tiny limp parachute. In contrast, this one was very much alive. I watched it closely. It was the only life in the cave if I didn't count, and I wasn't sure that I did. Its movement was unsettling and comical all at once, its spindly legs barely able to keep up with the weight of the floating jelly sack, lurching this way and that. It was lit from within by a pair of small, glowing, yellow eye orbs. I remained motionless, and eventually it approached my landing place. There was something else in that jelly sack, and I couldn't make it out at first, but as it got nearer, I saw that a skrillimander was floating there, inside. The crake's most recent meal. The jelly sack was a head and a stomach in one, where the poor little lizard was suspended. A novel thankfulness occurred to me that most creatures don't have translucent stomachs. The skrillimander twitched, and I knew it was still alive, at least partially. Probably the sack had some paralyzing fluid, and the creature was being slowly digested, alive. A tortured way to die. I suddenly felt a kinship with the skrillimander. The crake itself moved in such an ungainly way that it clearly belonged to the water as a creature, but I soon understood that it was on land to hunt for the next resident of its jelly sack. It scuttled along the edge of the pool. Its glowing eyes caught the reflective shell of a scramp, and it pounced into the shallow, its claws closing like a hand around the little shellfish. Before the creature could react, it was scooped into the crake's beak to join the skrillimander in a slow death. There was a pattern to it, and patience. I became entranced, watching this dance of life, here in the depths of a cavern, beneath a city that suddenly seemed to me to be built in order to deny all life forms save the human, the cruelest of all creatures. Then a hallucinated murmur quickly sharpened into voices. Someone was coming. The crake registered it too, and I watched it trip forward back into the pool. The voices took recognizable shape. Crombie and Nick Nist, those who I had been eavesdropping on before firing my net. They had come to collect their kill. I knew I had to move. I forced myself up on my elbows, and despite searing pain below my waist, I dragged myself along the cavern floor like some sort of mudfish, desperate. I noticed a flicker along a cavern wall, which I thought at first were their torches, but no, it was the glow of the crake. Swimming underneath the pool and overhanging stone, it had emerged in some hidden crevice behind the cave wall, a hiding spot. I made to do the same, laboriously dragging my half-corpse back along the path I had crawled from the pool. I flopped over the edge of it, the mudfish back into the river. When I hit the water, the long gashes of torn skin along the length of my body howled in protest. Whatever delicate scabs I had formed while lying dormant now sloughed off. I felt my mind might entirely drown in the pain. Crombie was near enough now that I could make out what she was saying. To protect the city, you don't need the moral high ground if you already have the high ground. I took a huge swallow of the stale cavern air and plunged my head underneath the surface of the pool, scooping my arms furiously in the direction of the crake's light, not knowing if the size or shape of the crevice would be enough to hold me. Luckily, it was not far, and I resurfaced on the other side of the cavern wall. That was just enough space to haul myself up and wedge my broken body between two rocks. The crake was just next to my head, frozen in a defensive crouch. I hoped it would stay that way and not somehow give away the hiding place it had just led me to. I could hear Nick Nist now, a quiet voice but a petulant one. He was needling a superior officer. But how do we know what his intent was? How can we say we're upholding justice if we're summarily executing every... He was on the dry flat. What other intent could he have? Crombie was dismissive. She had made that decision many times before. The matter at hand was the pertinent one. I can understand being wary if a stranger approaches the walls unannounced, but when someone is leaving, then they are worse than a stranger. They are a traitor. The person that Nick Nist had sniped out on the salt flats was a city dweller. The bodies regularly hauled inside the walls by the commission officers were enemies, or so we had always been told. But this callousness shouldn't have surprised me. Crombie had just stumbled upon the guard she had pushed to his death, her own man. "Roll him over," she barked. I could hear Nick Nist grunt with the effort. The sound of something heavy being moved scraped across the stone. "Where's the assassin?" Light trembled across the jagged rocks, their torches against the cave walls. I closed my eyes, a foolish thing to do. If the crake moved beside me, I didn't want to witness it. But they couldn't see me. The cavern itself was small. It appeared as though I was gone. "Rotter!" Crombie was furious. "This can't get out." "You stopped the assassination. Isn't that our job?" "It never should have been so close." "No matter. We'll find him. He must have escaped down one of the tunnels. I'll call the entire guard. We'll search the whole network." The revelations in the dark were many tonight. "What will you do if you find him? You can't execute him. He was landed." Though I could not see them, I could feel the anger in Crombie's pause. "Posing. Posing has landed. He was a sleeper agent sent by the floaters to infiltrate the city at the highest level, an enemy spy on a mission to assassinate the High Commissioner." "But we've only just signed the floaters' treaty. Mom, an accusation like that will start a war." Crombie was more dangerous than I had thought. Her voice dropped to a hiss that carried with terrible clarity. "Until the floaters are gone, our family isn't safe. Your father was a coward, and if you can't muster a bit more bravery, you'll meet his fate. Now, pick up that body. That guard was the assassin's first victim. Your friend is a hero for saving the High Commissioner." Nick Nist's grunts were considerably more distressed as he hauled the body away from the waterfall. The cave magnified the sound of his labored breathing. "Quickly, we've got a search to undertake." When they were gone, the gentle shush of the waterfall through the grate returned. The crake sprang to life and scuttled back down into the pool to resume its hunt. It was my chance to move. I dislodged from the rock crevice and, steeling myself against the pane, plunged back into the water. This time, after surfacing, I didn't hesitate. Some feeling had returned to my legs, though accompanied by considerable pain. Still, I was able to crawl out of the pool on all fours like a cat. The sight of the eternal waterfall suddenly made my tongue go dry. I crawled across the grate for a drink of water, carefully avoiding the blood stain where the guard had only just lain. This time, however, when I stuck my hand in the waterfall, I felt a counterflow, the strange sensation of water being forced upward. I pushed my hand further in, and then nothing. It was as though the waterfall was hollow inside. It took strength of will to put my whole head in the waterfall after what Crombie had done to me, but whatever the psychological effects of my torture had been, they would have to wait. I pushed my face in, past the counterflow, to the center, which was indeed empty. I opened my eyes and looked down. The eternal waterfall is not bottomless. I saw the base of it, an underground river. There were great machines pumping it upward toward the sky. The inside flows upwards, and at the top it tumbles over the outside to come back down, like a drinking straw plunged into a glass of liquid. This is why I had to write you. If they catch me and kill me, or make me sign a bogus confession, someone should know the truth. The eternal waterfall is no waterfall. It is a fountain. There is a falsehood at the center of our city.